Hi everyone, and welcome back to Philosophy of the Paranormal with me, Dr. Josh Redstone. So today we're going to be talking about dreams and out-of-body experiences. In particular, we're going to be looking at a little bit about why we dream, different theories of dreaming, the stages of sleep, and we're going to look at a particularly interesting kind of dream called a lucid dream, which is a dream you have wherein you know you're dreaming while you're actually dreaming. So that's very interesting. And the reason I want to talk about this curious phenomenon is because for a time the prospect of lucid dreams was considered nonsense, and lucid dreams were studied primarily by parapsychologists. It was not believed by many scientists and philosophers that lucid dreams were actual experiences, or indeed even that dreams are actual experiences. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that as we get into today's lecture. But that's what we'll be talking about today. Now, just a quick bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you've all seen my most recent announcement. I've given an extension for the second critical response, and that is because we haven't been able to provide feedback for the first one yet. And I'd really like all of you to be able to see my comments and Carrie's comments on your work. So, I've decided to extend it until the 26th of July, which means you will have to submit your second critical response by the same deadline as you would have to submit your special topic suggestion. I don't mind doubling up on these due dates because the special topic suggestion really is quite simple. It's just a topic that might be considered paranormal or supernatural that's not on the syllabus but that you might like to look at. So one example might be cryptozoology. Another one might be haunted houses. You know, anything like that that we're not covering in class but that you want to suggest for everyone to vote on as a possible topic. That's all you have to do. And you submit it in a document, Microsoft Word, PDF, and you get 5% just for doing that. So not a lot of work there, so you can focus on the second critical response once you've all received your feedback. And of course, if you've already submitted your second critical response, you can simply beef it up a little bit and then submit again before the 26th, and I will grade the most recent submission, so the updated version, in case you've written your response but you'd still like to take a look at the feedback from response 1 and maybe improve response number 2. Alright, so I hope all of you find that helpful. I'm sorry the announcement was so last minute, but I think it's the best thing to do for everyone because you'll all get your feedback and you'll all have a better idea of what you're supposed to be doing on these critical responses once you've seen that feedback. So that's why I've made that extension, and that is it for the housekeeping stuff for today. Next time I'll talk a little bit about the essay assignment that's coming up, but I think I'll leave it at this for today. So with that out of the way, let's get into the subject matter, dreams, particularly lucid dreams, and interesting phenomena like the out-of-body experience. All right, let's get into it. Now, of course, today's lecture is based primarily on chapter 23 from Blackmore's book, where she talks about dreams. Now, dreams are interesting for Blackmore in this case because, you know, her book is a book on consciousness. And as we'll see today, dreams relate in some interesting ways to consciousness studies. Of course, dreams, as I've mentioned kind of here and there leading up to this lecture, are a really interesting example of something that was once considered mysterious, but that we can now study with the tools of cognitive science, right? And there are a lot of different ways why, or a lot of different reasons why, I should say, we might want to do this. Now, I haven't really talked a whole lot about consciousness in this class. I've sort of mentioned it here and there. In previous lectures, for example, we've talked about the power of consciousness and this idea that, you know, the power of consciousness or the omnipotence of thought, the ability for conscious intention to influence the world, basically, and how this is an idea that you can kind of tease out of a lot of paranormal research or parapsychological research, particularly when it comes to ESP and PK. But we haven't talked about what consciousness is, and that's because you know, consciousness is itself a mysterious phenomenon. When we talk about consciousness in this kind of setting, like a philosophy class or perhaps a cognitive science class or even a psychology class, we tend to be talking about awareness, right? Like, what is it to be conscious? Well, one answer is to be awake and aware, right? Say, of your surroundings or what you're doing at any given moment. That's one way in which we can be conscious, right? And that's particularly relevant here because when we're asleep, of course, we're unconscious. And when we're dreaming, well, some argue that we are not conscious, and others argue that, in fact, we are kind of conscious when we dream. So there's one way in which we can be conscious, and that is just to be awake and aware. But there's another, a little bit more philosophical understanding to what it is to be conscious. To have consciousness or to be conscious means that there's something that it's like to be that conscious agent. What do I mean by there's something that it's like? I mean that there's a phenomenal component to consciousness, a sort of subjective phenomenal component to consciousness. When we talk about consciousness, we talk about, things that I'm aware of or perhaps that you are aware of. There's always a subject there. And that subject needs to not only be awake and aware, it needs to be experiencing things. And when you're experiencing things, there are things that it's like to experience those things. Often this gets talked about in terms of qualia. So qualia are those subjective elements of experience. The cliche example is, of course, the redness of a rose or the bitter smell of coffee. There's something that it's like to view a beautiful red rose or to smell a nice, delicious cup of coffee. There's something that it's like to stub your toe, right? Or to give a high five, or to go to a rock concert or something, right? There's a subjective element to those experiences. There's a what it's likeness to conscious experience. And that's usually what philosophers are interested in when they talk about consciousness. Now, Blackmore thinks dreams could be helpful when it comes to consciousness studies because by understanding how dreams are realized in the brain, that is, how does our brain dream? What's it doing? What's happening in the brain to implement a dream? By understanding this and understanding the differences between the dreaming and the waking brain, we might be able to identify what neuroscientists and philosophers call the neural correlates of consciousness. This is another naturalistic, materialistic sort of assumption, but I think it's warranted. This is the idea that, our subjective experience is realized somewhere in the brain. The brain, with all its neuronal firings and thalamocortical loops and all this complicated neuroscience that's going on up here, somehow realizes our subjective experience. And this is where we kind of encounter the old classic philosophical questions like the mind-body problem. Remember, Descartes thought that mind was a different substance than matter. So how do the brain and mind actually interact? Well, Descartes didn't have an answer for that. Materialists would say that consciousness or the mind is just what the brain does. But now we have to explain, well, how does this meat machine, to use Andy Clark's terminology, in our head, how does that, all this objective, just physical stuff, produce a subjective experience? That's another mystery. We'll call that, depending on who you ask, this is either the hard or the easy problem of consciousness. Most people call it the hard problem. The easy problems are figuring out things like attention, memory. The hard problem, according to David Chalmers, is how do we understand how this objective physical stuff gives rise to subjective conscious experience? That's called the hard problem of consciousness. And it's kind of just a repackaged version of the mind-body interaction problem. Also, by talking about the differences between dreaming and waking, we can also clarify what we mean by conscious and unconscious states. And I think I've already sort of done that in the lead up to this lecture, right? One way in which we're conscious is when we're awake, as opposed to when we're asleep, when we're unconscious. Think about it. When you're asleep, you're just asleep. There's nothing that it's like to be asleep. You go to sleep, maybe you have a dream, and you wake up, but you don't usually remember being asleep, right? Of course, we're not going to get to the bottom of all these interesting areas of interest here today, but you should be aware of these things as we move through the rest of the lecture, and indeed through the rest of the class. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about how Blackmore thinks that by researching dreams we might be able to make some breakthroughs in consciousness studies, especially when it comes to the neural correlates of consciousness and identifying what those are. But what is a dream, anyway? Some possible answers to this question are just the kinds of things you can find by doing a quick Google search, right? I mean, Google Dictionary, for that matter, defines dreams as a series of thoughts, images, and sensations occurring in a person's mind during sleep. Yeah, okay. Sounds like it captures what dreams are. Wikipedia, I don't encourage you to use Wikipedia as a source in academic work, but, you know, just for whatever reason, I've seemed to have put it here. So Wikipedia says that a dream is a succession of images, ideas, emotions, and sensations that usually occur involuntarily and in the mind during certain stages of sleep. That is actually a pretty good definition of what it is to dream, I think. And most other more technical definitions agree with these ones. Now, most dreams occur during REM sleep. You may have heard of REM sleep. REM stands for Rapid Eye Movement, REM. And REM sleep is actually characterized by, you know, in addition to these rapid eye saccades, you know, our eyes are kind of looking all around back and forth under closed lids. REM sleep is also characterized by paralysis of the body. So everything pretty much except your heart, your lungs, and your eyes are paralyzed when you're in REM sleep. This is why you don't get up and act out your dreams. It would be very maladaptive if we did that, right? So, the brain is also very active when we're in REM sleep, about as active as it is when we're awake, in fact. And we'll get to the reasons why that is in a moment. But the body is paralyzed. The most you can do is maybe twitch a little bit. And you've probably maybe seen your pet or a partner you know, twitching like that and moving their eyes while they're in REM sleep. It's because they're having a dream. But what's really cool, I think, is the brain activity. When we are dreaming in REM sleep, if I were to say use an fMRI or an EEG to look at the kinds of activity that are going on in your brain while you're in REM sleep, it would be very similar to the kinds of activity I might observe if I did that while you're awake. And that's because the brain is, you know, as I said, I don't want to get ahead of myself. That's because when you're dreaming, the brain is basically representing yourself in an environment, you know, and acting in that environment, just like it's doing when you're awake. So that's why your brain is very active. There's lots of activity in your thalamocortical loops. These are thought to be important in the realization of consciousness. These are loops between the cortex and the thalamus, different parts of the brain where information is traveling back and forth between these different centers of the brain. There's a lot of activity in the old brain as well. Your limbic system. So this is the part of the brain that regulates things like emotion and the fight or flight response. And indeed, we can experience powerful emotions in dreams, and nightmares for that matter. One interesting thing, though, is there is a lot less activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this is actually an area of the brain that's associated with reasoning, critical thinking, decision making, basically things that we call executive function. And this is probably why most of us do not realize we're dreaming when we're dreaming, in spite of all the weird stuff that's going on, because our critical thinky bits of the brain, to use a non-scientific terminology, just are not as active when we're dreaming as they are when we're awake. Now, dreams occur multiple times throughout the night. In fact, we go through these stages of sleep. I'll put a nice, helpful diagram here, but you can also find it on slide number 6. We start off, you know, from wakefulness, and we gradually drift to sleep. We might have a very short REM cycle, and we'll go down from stage 1 to stage 2, 3, and 4 into very deep sleep. Stage 4 is deep sleep. And we'll come back up to REM sleep periodically throughout the night, going through 4 or perhaps 5 cycles. And each REM cycle is longer than the next one. And these are the periods of sleep where dreams usually occur. However, sometimes dreams do occur in non-REM sleep, this sort of the valleys on this graph, rather than the troughs where REM sleep, or peaks of the graphs where REM sleep happens. But the dreams that people report during non-REM sleep tend to be a lot less vivid, a lot more thought-like, and they can be a lot harder to remember than dreams that occur during REM sleep. How do we know this? Well, basically we have people that come into sleep labs and we can study them, and it's really as simple as monitoring the experimental participants to see whether they're in REM sleep or not. So we can see, oh, patient A is in non-REM sleep, let's wake them up and ask them what they were thinking. And they'll say something like, I was just thinking of my nephew or something, right? And then if we do the same thing during REM sleep, typically people will report a more typical sort of dream. Like, oh, I was having a dream that I was late for an important meeting or something, right? Maybe an anxiety dream like this. Another thing Blackmore mentions that's really interesting is a lot of animals dream, particularly mammals and birds. Mammals and birds are the kinds of animals that have the brains that are sophisticated enough, I guess, to dream. Reptiles don't dream. But not all mammals dream. An interesting fact about dolphins that you may not be aware of is that they do not seem to dream. And that's because only 1/2 of their brain enters REM sleep at a time. Which makes sense. I mean, if you're a dolphin, you gotta keep moving. You have to breathe air. You can't stop coming up for air and swimming around and going about your dolphin business. So if you have a brain where only 1/2 of your brain sleeps at a time, then you can just go about your business, catching fish and seals and breathing oxygen, as dolphins do. Sometimes I hear conversations where people talk about their dreams, and somebody might say something like, oh, I never dream, and you may feel that way yourself. Perhaps you think, I never dream. And your justification for thinking that is probably just that you don't remember your dreams. But the fact is, everybody dreams multiple times a night. So remember, you go through REM sleep probably 4 or 5 times at least during a typical, 7 to 8 hour night of sleep. If you're really sleeping in, like I like to do sometimes, you'll probably have even more REM cycles, maybe 1 or 2 more, and they'll be even longer, which is actually really good for having lucid dreams, as we'll talk about in a moment. Now, the reason why a lot of people mistakenly believe that they don't dream, or at least that they don't dream very often, is, as I mentioned a moment ago, because dreams are very difficult to remember. In fact, this may be an evolutionary adaptation, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. It may be beneficial for us to not remember our dreams, it turns out. But yeah, most people just don't remember them. And as we get older, it's actually harder to remember them. You probably still remember a particularly vivid dream from your childhood, for example, but you may have forgotten what you dreamed about last night. So as we age, dream recall gets more difficult unless you practice it, which you can do just by using a few simple techniques that I'll mention toward the end of the lecture. But anyway, I mean, if you were one of the aforementioned sleep lab patients that I was talking about, then you would find it easy to remember your dreams if I woke you up from a dream. In fact, if we don't wake up directly from REM sleep, we're likely to forget the dream we were having. So if I'm having a dream, I'm in REM sleep, and then my alarm goes off, I'll probably remember that dream, at least for a few moments on waking, unless I try to really commit the details of the dream to memory. But if you experience a REM period and you have a dream, and then you go back to sleep, regular sleep, like maybe a light sleep or a deep sleep, you'll probably forget that dream. So that's why it's difficult to remember dreams. Well, okay, so why are dreams really difficult to remember though? Well, as I said a moment ago, it could be an adaptation. Um, Psychophysiologist Stephen LeBerge, he has a really interesting theory, which I think is based on Revan Suo's threat response theory of dreams, which I will talk about in a moment. But basically, he asks you to imagine a scenario a bit like the following. Imagine that there was a cat who lived next door to a particularly vicious dog. And maybe one night the cat has a dream that the dog has run away or something. So the cat might wake up and believe in a cat kind of way anyway, that there is no longer a threat next door, namely this vicious dog. But if the cat ventures over believing that the dog is absent, it might get eaten by this vicious dog, and it may not be able to pass on its genes to future generations. So perhaps difficulty remembering our dreams is actually an adaptation, because it would be maladaptive to remember too much of our dreams and to confuse them with reality, I suppose. This doesn't seem to be so much of a problem for humans because we can think critically about all the absurd stuff in dreams, but maybe for our evolutionary ancestors or for other mammals, it's maladaptive to remember dreams. I'm not sure about that. It may just be a feature of the dreaming brain. The brain's getting ready to wake up, or maybe it's a feature of what dreams are really for. Dreams may serve a purpose, but it may just not be important for us to remember the content of our dreams. So this is LeBerge's example. I'm not sure whether I buy it, but I think it's an interesting idea. So I thought I would, make you aware of that. So I don't know. Maybe we don't remember our dreams for a similar reason to why we don't, get up and act out our dreams, because we're paralyzed in REM sleep. In either case, this would be maladaptive for the organism, right? It would not be good if you got up and acted out your dreams. It would be dangerous. And I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, Josh, what about sleepwalking? Well, I have to tell you something interesting about sleepwalking, and that is that sleepwalking does not happen in REM sleep. So that's right, when you're sleepwalking, you are not acting out a dream. Sleepwalking, or somnambulism, to use the medical term, actually occurs in non-REM sleep. So if you are dreaming while you're sleepwalking, it's not like a REM dream. It's not visual. There's probably not any kind of narrative or other dream characters there. There's probably not a lot of weird, strange stuff going on. These dreams are much more thought-like. So that's actually what's happening when you're sleepwalking. You're actually in non-REM sleep if you sleepwalk. You do not sleepwalk in REM sleep because the motor signals from the brain to the body are actually inhibited somewhere in the brain stem, so that you don't get up and, if I'm dreaming, I'm going to go outside, I open my door and go outside in my dream. Well, maybe what I'm really doing is walking out of an open window in real life, which would not be good, right? So that's why you're paralyzed when you're dreaming. All right, so why do we dream, and what are some accounts of dreams? Well, before we get to the modern stuff, just to sort of illustrate how dreams have been associated with the supernatural or the mystical, it'd be good to just briefly mention some ancient accounts of dreaming. So most ancient human societies believed that dreams were divine in origin, or if not divine in origin, but divine in nature, I guess we could say. For example, the ancient Greeks believed in a god that they called Morpheus. This means shaper of form. And Morpheus was the principal god of dreams in ancient Greek religion. And Morpheus would send dreams, or oneiroi, as the Greek called them, which literally mean dreams. They imagined them as gods, right? Oneiroi would send a dream, there would be like a god for each dream, because the Greeks were kind of animists, in this way. And they presided over various aspects of dreaming. They delivered dreams to people. I don't know if delivered is the right word, but you get the idea. To the Greeks, dreams were divine in origin. Of course, other cultures, just because the Greeks tend to be what get looked at in philosophy classes, other cultures have also attributed divine importance or perhaps even prophetic importance to dreams. So, for example, the Aboriginal people of Australia, in their mythology, it says that the universe was dreamed into existence. And if you look, coming back into the West, for lack of a better term, we can even find this kind of thing in the Bible. For example, in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, the prophet Daniel interprets the dreams of the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar II. So that's interesting, and you can go and read about that if you're interested. Dreams, I guess, have not just been associated with the divine or with, prophetic knowledge, but perhaps knowledge in general. There are many shamans and figures like this in many cultures around the world which might interpret dreams for you, or who might try to have a dream on your behalf to try and ascertain something for you, to get information for you, right? So knowledge has also been associated with dreams for a long time, and this is even carried into the modern age, where dreams have actually inspired some scientific breakthroughs. My favorite example is that of the chemist Kekule, who actually dreamed of an Ouroboros. He had a dream of an Ouroboros, which is, a circular depiction of a snake devouring its own tail. So, it goes on forever. He dreamt of an Ouroboros, which he claimed led him to the discovery of the structure of the benzene molecule, which is, a kind of circular-looking molecule, I suppose. Again, I'm not a chemist, but the important thing for our purposes is that Kekule ultimately credited the inspiration for this discovery to a dream that he had. Now, what about accounts of dreaming? What are dreams really like? Scientifically, what can we say about them? The first account of dreams, the first modern account that we get, is probably that of Sigmund Freud. Now, of course, Freud was a psychoanalyst, and he pioneered that field, the field of psychoanalysis. And we can find most of his ideas about dreams contained in his work, The Interpretation of Dreams, which he published in 1899. Now, here Freud was all about bringing a sort of psychoanalytic account of dreams to the table. And basically, on Freud's account, dreams are a kind of wish fulfillment, a kind of unconscious wish fulfillment that gets expressed during sleep. So Freud, is all about like the unconscious and about repressing things, whether we're consciously repressing them or not. Repression for Freud is, pushing back into the unconscious, perhaps your fears, your neuroses, and so forth. Freud thought that we make these things unconscious via repression, but that they return, and this is called the return of the repressed. They return to consciousness via, interesting symbolism in dreams, for example. So Freud thinks that maybe we have unconscious desires that go unfulfilled, or they are censored by the mind, but they might still be expressed in dreams, and this is why Freud associates all manner of weird sexual desires with the symbolism of dreams. Then again, as Freud himself said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? A lot of Freud's famous ideas come from the interpretation of dreams. So you've undoubtedly heard of the Oedipus complex, I'm sure. The Oedipus complex is, according to Freud, the unconscious desire to kill one's father and romance, shall we say, one's mother. Now, Freud was not saying something as ridiculous as, everybody wants to, bang their moms and kill their dads consciously. He was not saying that. This comes from an old myth, not a myth, a play by Sophocles called Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus the King. or Oedipus Rex, to use its Latin name. Basically, in this play, Oedipus, without knowing that he's done so, kills his father and marries his mother. He doesn't know that it's his father he's killed or his mother that he's married until the blind seer Tiresias eventually kind of leads him to the truth. And when he realizes the truth, he gouges out his own eyes, which Freud interprets as a kind of castration symbolism there. So Freud, by the way, is great if you want to understand, art, myth, literature. Freud is awesome for that. I'm not sure how good his work is when it comes to the mind anymore, but if you want to get an appreciation for art, for storytelling, mythology, Freud is actually very fun to read. And if you want to get a sense of what I mean, you can check out The Pervert's Guide to Cinema, which is a film hosted by or presented by Slavoj Žižek. Very entertaining, very informative, and it will give you a kind of a sense of what I'm talking about here when it comes to Freud and psychoanalysis and understanding, different kinds of art. Anyway, the Oedipus complex is just one of many ideas that comes from the interpretation of dreams, and Freud gets made fun of a lot today, somewhat unjustifiably. Yes, his ideas are not really things that we can test scientifically. So Freud is not very scientific, but he's almost made fun of to the point where, his ideas are talked about in almost this kind of parody-like way, where, we're not even talking about things Freud actually said anymore, So anyway, that's the interpretation of dreams for you. There are many more modern accounts that kind of are a lot more scientifically up to speed than Freud's ideas. So, for example, Owen Flanagan thinks that dreams are, quote, evolutionary epiphenomena. That is, they play no causal role in our mental lives. Philosophers talk about epiphenomena as something that has no causal power, in our mental life. It's this inessential extra. Consciousness, in fact, is something that some philosophers say is epiphenomenal. So what that means is that we feel like we're consciously thinking and acting, and we are the author of our actions and our thoughts, but really that is all just an illusion. Really, I'm really just on automatic pilot the whole time, like a robot or something, and I just have this weird conscious experience that makes me think that I'm in control, even though I'm not. So that's an epiphenomenon. Dreams might be epiphenomenal as well. Flanagan actually says, quote, dreaming came along as a free rider on a system designed to think and sleep. So we have these brains that can think, perceive, create, reason. We can do a lot of impressive stuff with our brains, and of course we can also sleep. Our brains need sleep. And dreaming is just a sort of inessential extra that, a brain that can do all of that other stuff can also do. A brain that can think, perceive, reason, and feel can also dream. But dreaming doesn't have a purpose. That's what Flanagan is saying. Now, usually we don't think of epiphenomena as having effects, but Flanagan is a little bit different here. And so is Hobson, Alan Hobson, another psychiatrist or psychologist who researches dreams. They differ on, their understanding of epiphenomena here in just a little bit, in the sense that dreams can have effects on us, but they don't really have a significant causal role in the mental. Perhaps they're not really mental epiphenomena, but again, as Flanagan says, they are evolutionary epiphenomena. They didn't evolve for a purpose. They just kind of came along. This is actually what Stephen Jay Gould, the famous paleontologist, called a spandrel. A spandrel is something that has evolved just as a consequence of other parts of the organism that have also evolved to serve an adaptive function. But the spandrel doesn't really serve a function itself. It's just a sort of extra thing that evolved, right? So perhaps instead of an evolutionary epiphenomena, we should think of dreams as a spandrel. That would be a little bit more clear. Anyway, the point was, dreams can have effects. If you have a nightmare or an anxiety dream, that dream will probably color your mood for the rest of the day, whether you remember it or not. So there's a way that dreams can have effects on us. Likewise, if you have a particularly awesome dream, you might wake up feeling pretty good, you know? So dreams can have effects. But as Alan Hobson says, most people don't remember their dreams, and they do just fine. Perhaps dreams are evolutionary epiphenomena, or spandrels. Others think that dreams certainly do have a purpose. So earlier I mentioned Revansuo's threat simulation theory. Perhaps Laberge took some inspiration from this theory when he was talking about why we forget our dreams. But what Revansuo says is that dreams evolved to simulate threats so that we can actually practice dealing with them without actually having to deal with any real danger. Revansuo, as evidence for this idea, points out that dreams that we have in this modern world, you know, when we're not hunting and gathering anymore, nonetheless include more threatening events than we usually face in waking life. So that's perhaps one piece of evidence for this threat response theory or threat simulation theory. A similar idea is endorsed by someone named Humphrey, who thinks of dreaming as a kind of mental play, you know, a kind of way to rehearse things and deal with perhaps threats, as Revansuo claims. Basically a kind of mental simulation for helping us to deal with stuff in the world. And we can run this simulation while we're asleep. Humphrey captures this quite well when he says, quote, "Dreaming represents the most audacious and ingenious of nature's tricks for educating her psychologists." Psychologists being us in this case. That's an interesting theory. Perhaps dreams do have a purpose, and maybe it's for helping us deal with real-world situations. And this could be why we dream about more threatening stimuli than we actually encounter. This could be why children have a lot of anxiety dreams and nightmares, for example. There's many other examples that you can look at in this chapter that Blackmore talks about. Alan Hobson, on the other hand, he suggests that dreams may support memory consolidation. So what we're doing here on this view when we're dreaming is the brain is kind of overloading these neural circuits to kind of shore up what we need to keep from that day's experience and get rid of the rest. So dreams might be like a sort of memory consolidation / neural garbage disposal system, if you want to think of it that way. So dreams may have a variety of functions. They may have the function of helping us to deal with threats or to practice other aspects of the world or to consolidate memories, or they may have no purpose at all. We really don't know. But in any case, for any of this to be true, we still don't need to really remember our dreams, right? If we're unconsciously rehearsing something or consolidating memories and getting rid of neural junk, all of these theories can work without us having to remember our dreams. And if you're curious about the details as to why, leave a comment below or take a little deep dive into some of those extra sections in chapter 23, those boxes that Blackmore has dispersed throughout the chapter where she goes into more depth on various aspects of the material she presents. So, why do we dream? We're not sure. I guess that's the moral of the story that I'm telling here. I mentioned earlier that dreams have long been associated with, the mysterious, or thought of as a mysterious or at least curious mental phenomenon. And that remains true to a very great extent, even today, because we are not sure why we have dreams. So, we're not sure why we have them, but how do they work? Well, there's an interesting theory, which I learned about when I was actually a teenager, I guess making my first forays into learning about the mental. And I read about Stephen Laberge's work and an interesting theory that he puts forward to explain how dreams work, why they're so strange, and why they feature such odd, inconsistent, surprising content. So remember, if you will, as I mentioned a moment ago, when we're in REM sleep, the stage of sleep that we dream, the brain is pretty much as active as it is when we're awake. Why is that? Well, according to LaBerge, that's because the dreaming brain is doing pretty much the same thing the waking brain is doing. That is, it is representing you, your body, and the environment. Now here's something I should talk about, this idea of representation. I'm talking about something called a mental representation. This is not in the slides, although maybe it should be, but you should write it down. A mental representation is internally stored information or mentally stored information, in this case about, yourself or the environment. You may look around the room right now and think to yourself that I'm seeing the environment. I'm like directly seeing it. I'm seeing the world as it is. This is a view called direct realism or naive realism. But I'm skeptical of this, and that's because I think what the brain is doing is representing the world. When I look at my camera or my guitar or that plant over there, I'm not seeing the plant itself. What's happening is light rays are bouncing off of these objects and hitting my eyes and creating signals in my optic nerve that go back here to my occipital cortex, and a bunch of very complicated stuff happens, and then my brain creates a representation of what I'm looking at. So I'm not seeing the world directly, I'm seeing it indirectly, and this is called indirect realism. So the brain's job is kind of like a virtual reality system, if you think about it. It's taking all this information from the environment and building an experience of it so that you can navigate around the world and, basically be alive and do things as a living agent in the world, right? So, why is the brain as active when we're asleep as it is when we're awake? Well, LaBerge thinks when we're dreaming, the brain is doing the exact same thing. It's simulating a world. It's creating an experience. Now you might be thinking, hang on, we're asleep. Where's the brain getting the information it needs in order to build this experience? Well, our sensory systems aren't completely offline, right? A loud noise could wake you up, for example. And sometimes this gets incorporated into our dreams. Sometimes I have a dream that there's an alarm going off, like a fire alarm or something, and then I wake up and it's just my alarm clock going off, right? So sometimes that happens, but where the brain gets most of this information when we're dreaming and it's constructing a dream is actually from the inside, from the brain itself. It's using memories and expectations and things like that to build an experience. In fact, LaBerge proposes that the brain draws upon all kinds of things, not just memories, but emotions as well, past experiences, worries about the future, things that happened to you the day before. Any number of things can help to generate a dream during REM sleep. Basically, this all happens, he thinks, as a matter of association between what he calls schemas, active and inactive schemas, or what a philosopher or a psychologist would probably call concepts. Concepts or schemas are like mental items, right? So let's say I had a weird encounter with a rude person at the grocery store. I don't know, and then I go home and later that night I go to sleep. Maybe that memory was particularly active in my mind when I was going to sleep, so that it's still kind of a little bit active when I reach REM sleep. So maybe I'll find myself at the grocery store dealing with a whole bunch of rude people at the grocery store, because that concept or that memory is what is active. And then via association, other stuff starts to happen. Could be associated with grocery stores or other rude customers or any number of things. But it's this sort of web of associations that gradually unfolds just based upon what is just kind of active when you start dreaming. And this is how a dream is built. This is how LaBerge thinks it works anyway. And if he's right, then why are dreams so weird and unstable and unpredictable? Well, it's because that when we're awake, our representation of the world is stable because the external world is stable. You know, all of this information is coming from a stable source that's coming into my perceptual systems and making its way to my brain. It's all coming from a stable source, which is why I can check the time or read a piece of text or look over there and see something, look away, and when I look back, the world will be the same as it was before, because the world is pretty stable. Not so with dreams. You know, when we're dreaming, we don't have a stable representation of the world. We don't even have stable sensory input coming in from the external world. So we can't represent a stable kind of situation in our dreams. You know, this is why dreams are so weird and random and chaotic, because it's all association between different schemas and concepts that are becoming active via this web of association, perhaps, right? Not only that, but as I mentioned earlier, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is important for executive function, things like critical thinking and reasoning and planning, is less active during dreams. So we don't have a stable source of information to build a dream out of. We only have memories, motivations, expectations, anxieties, and things like this, which are kind of fluid and which may become active or inactive at any given time in the dream. So that's why dreams are so weird and unpredictable. And we don't notice this because the parts of the brain that we usually employ when we're thinking critically about something are less active when we're dreaming. So that's why dreams are so weird. So I've been talking about dreams as if they were experiences or are experiences in a similar but not quite the same way that I'm having an experience right now. But this has not always been the case. In fact, in the middle and late 20th century, it was seriously questioned whether dreams were experiences at all. We had theories being proposed like, for example, Daniel Dennett's account of spontaneous memory insertion of dreaming. Sometimes this is called his cassette theory of dreaming. Basically, on Dennett's account, dreams are the result of, quote, instantaneous memory insertions occurring at the moment of awakening. So, what does that mean? Basically, Dennett thinks this is what's going on. There's a sort of composition process, and that's what develops a dream narrative during sleep. You're not actually having an experience. You're not consciously aware. It's just that the brain is kind of, making these cassettes, as it were, of memories that it can insert upon awakening, right? Insert upon awakening. The memory insertion process itself is the other component of Dennett's theory. And this underlies the recollection of your dreams when you awaken. So when you have what seems to have been a dream, Dennett says, you weren't really having a sort of narrative experience while in REM sleep. Your brain was just creating these bits of the dream narrative, and then they're inserted in the right way instantly when you wake up, so that it seems as though you had an experience. For this reason, Dennett does not think that dreams count as experiences. What we remember as an experience is really something that's just been popped in like a cassette tape. I don't know if any of you remember cassette tapes, but it's like that for Dennett. It's like the dream would be the music that's recorded on the tape, but I guess to extend this analogy, for Dennett, there's no actual recording that you're doing when you're asleep. It's just the brain kind of putting stuff together so that it can pop it in to your memory when you wake up. Very weird theory, if you ask me, but interesting nonetheless. So why wouldn't this count as an experience? Well, Dennett kind of puts it like this. He says, there's nothing that it's like to dream. Because when you're dreaming, you're not actually experiencing this narrative unfolding chain of dream events. But there is something that it's like to have had a dream because of the spontaneous memory insertions. Now, Blackmore says that this is a difference that doesn't really make a difference, but I don't know. I think there may be some empirical evidence that suggests that Dennett may not have captured dreams quite right here. But I mention this theory just to illustrate that there was a point in the 20th century where, you know, dreams were not thought of as experiences, and therefore when it comes to lucid dreams, those can't exist. You can't have an experience when you're asleep because there's no experience going on. It's this composition process when you're dreaming. Or others, like earlier philosophers like Malcolm, would say, you know, when you're asleep, you're unconscious. So just on that fact alone, you can't be conscious in a dream because when you're asleep, you're unconscious, and dreams happen when we're asleep. So lucid dreams, nonsense. And this is why they were kind of relegated to the realm of parapsychology before being accepted as something that mainstream psychologists might want to take a look at. So anyway, let's finally talk about lucid dreams now. All right, so let's talk a little bit about lucid dreaming, because that's what I'm really interested in as a sort of example of, you know, when parapsychology actually does succeed, then the subject matter that it's studying kind of stops being parapsychological, which is interesting to me. So that's why I want to talk about lucid dreams. They're a very interesting example of that to me. So what is a lucid dream? Well, as I mentioned earlier, a lucid dream is a dream during which the dreamer knows that he or she is dreaming. So it's an awareness that, you know, it's all a dream while it's still going on. It's not like you wake up and, oh, I was dreaming. No, that's not what it is. It's when you're actually dreaming and you realize, holy smokes, it's a dream. Now, there are records of lucid dreams going all the way back to antiquity. But for a long time, scientists thought this was impossible. These accounts of lucid dreams, you know, people must just be mistaken about them. We can't be conscious during sleep. You know, when you're lucid in a dream, you're aware that you're in a dream. So that is, you know, that sounds an awful lot like a conscious experience. But how can that be possible? Because we dream when we're asleep, and we're unconscious when we're asleep. So this was the reasoning of some researchers prior to the work of Stephen LaBerge and Keith Hearn, who I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now these two, Keith Hearn and Stephen LaBerge, independently demonstrated that lucid dreams were actually real phenomena. They did this within a year or so of one another on different continents. LaBerge was working at, I believe he was working at Stanford University in California, and Keith Hearn was working in England. And they both independently kind of came up with the same or a similar idea of how we could demonstrate that lucid dreams actually do occur. And each of them used participants that were skilled at having lucid dreams. This was important. They called them oneironauts, which is Greek for explorers of the dream state. So they get these oneironauts, people who are skilled at having lucid dreams, into their sleep labs. Now both LaBerge, by the way, was not a parapsychologist. He is a psychophysiologist. That means he studies the mind-body relationship. But Keith Hearn was a parapsychologist. In any case, both LaBerge and Hearn knew that the movements, the rapid eye movements that people make in dreams are probably not random. They're probably linked to actual gaze within a dream. You know, what you're looking at in the dream environment is how your eyes will move. And this was actually discovered following a sleep study where it was observed that the participant had made several sort of like long, slow back and forth eye movements. When they asked the participant what they were dreaming about, they told the researchers that they had been dreaming about a game of table tennis or ping pong. And this person was watching the ball going back and forth, being, you know, hit back and forth across the table. And that's why his eyes were moving in this way. And they were able to detect this using an EEG machine. So what they did was they realized that they could use eye movements as a signal from within a dream. So somebody could be in the sleep lab dreaming, having a lucid dream, and actually send a signal, predetermined signal, using a set of eye movements to the people in the sleep lab. That is pretty cool. So Hearn in 1979 and then a year later in 1980, LaBerge, both used this method to demonstrate that lucid dreams were real. Their participants could signal not only when they realized it was a dream that they were having in the sleep lab, but also when they undertook different experiments that they could perform in the dream. Things like counting in the dream. You know, if you count in the dream, does time pass roughly the same? Does it take you the same amount of time to count to 10 in a dream as it does when you're awake? Turns out it does, by the way. But these are the interesting experiments that LaBerge and Keith Hearn were able to do. And LaBerge in particular has used this kind of methodology to further study the mind-body relationship, especially during sleep. So he would do things like, like I mentioned earlier on the subjective passage of time, and also studies on other experiences like what happens to heart rate in dreams, like if you exercise in a dream, will your heart rate go up? It will, interestingly enough. All kinds of stuff like that. So LaBerge has done some interesting psychophysiological research there. And I think it's particularly interesting because it kind of shows that, if you've got a participant in the sleep lab who's doing all of this in real time, signaling that they've realized it's a dream, signaling that they're undertaking perhaps a counting experiment, signaling that they're going to engage in an activity, like trying to move from one dream location to another and seeing if they can remain lucid. All of this seems to be happening in real time when we look at the data from the equipment used in the sleep lab, and that seems to suggest that Dennett's cassette theory, at least to my mind, it suggests that Dennett's cassette theory doesn't really capture what's going on when we dream. So LaBerge's work, in a nutshell, suggests to me that dreams are experiences. Lucid dreams in particular, because we're not as awake and aware when we're in a regular non-lucid dream. Then again, when we're awake, just going through the motions, maybe driving home, making dinner, listening to a podcast, we might not be all that aware of other things going on in those cases either, even though we're awake, So, I think that dreams, lucid and non-lucid dreams, are conscious experiences, and non-lucid dreams were much less aware than in lucid dreams, and perhaps even less so than than we are in most moments in our waking lives. But I would also counter and say that, even in our waking lives, we're often less aware and less conscious than we think we are. So, and you can kind of demonstrate to yourself. You can demonstrate this to yourself by just doing a quick mindfulness exercise. Just look up a mindfulness exercise, something that's designed to get you focused on the sights and sounds and smells and your breathing and your thoughts. Just find any one, and do it, and compare how aware you feel afterwards with how aware you felt before. And I think that will kind of illustrate my point. So just to come back to this question, why do we dream? To kind of summarize things, there is no agreed upon answer to this question. There's still a lot we don't understand about dreams. They are still quite mysterious, and that's okay, because it means that scientists have something to study. Dreams, as we discussed today, might be epiphenomenal. They might not serve any purpose. It's just something that comes along with having a brain that can do everything else that our brain can do. Perceive, think, imagine, create, so on. Dreams might be important for memory consolidation, or for forming and testing new concepts or new behavioral strategies. Dreams might be just the result of moving memories around and getting rid of the information we don't need and shoring up that information that we do need and making sure it's encoded in long-term memory. So dreams may have no purpose, or they may have one or perhaps multiple of these purposes. We don't really know yet, and we need to do a lot more research to try and figure it all out. Now, maybe you want to try having a lucid dream for yourself, which I highly recommend. It's pretty cool. When I was a teenager, I worked really hard to try and be able to do it whenever I wanted, and I never succeeded. You know, I had some successes, but it always seemed like I tried and tried and tried and was never very good at it. And then as I became an adult, I kind of stopped doing that, and the funny thing is, now without trying, I'll have 1 or 2 a month, sometimes more if I sleep in, which, who am I kidding? I try to do as often as possible. So, you know, some people are more, I guess, talented, or maybe have more of a knack for this than others. Some people might get mental blocks that might prevent them from succeeding. I think this is what was happening in my case with my early efforts. But these are things that you can actually have for yourself. So if you don't believe me, if you think that, Josh, you're crazy, there's no such thing as lucid dreams, well, you can try it for yourself and see. Now, I'm not going to go over any specific instructions here. It may be enough just having watched this lecture to get you thinking about them. Maybe the next time you go to sleep and have a dream, you'll realize you're dreaming. Who knows? But there are things you can do. I recommend that you go to Stephen LaBerge's website. Just Google Stephen LaBerge, Lucidity Institute, and he's got all kinds of exercises and things that you can do to try and get your mind thinking about having a lucid dream. So for those that are interested, you can go and explore that information on your own. But a lot of the information you'll find there will have to do with improving your dream recall. Remember, dreams are hard to remember, and it gets harder to remember them the older we get. But you can actually improve dream recall. It is a skill that you can get better at. Basically, when you wake up, you want to try and not get up right away. You want to kind of develop the habit of just laying still and trying to remember what you dreamed. And this will come with practice, and you'll find you'll be able to recall more and more of your dreams. And you'll probably want to keep a record of your dreams. You'll want to write them down. This will help you build your dream recall, but more importantly, it's also going to give you a catalog of all the weird stuff that happens in your dreams that you can train yourself to recognize. And that's basically what you need to do to get good at having a lucid dream or having lucid dreams. You need to learn what is dreamlike about your dreams, and you have to teach yourself to recognize that. How can you do that? Well, after you've got a bunch of dreams written down and you've noticed some commonalities, maybe you dream about your teeth falling out. A lot of people I've talked to, they have this weird anxiety dream where their teeth are falling out or their teeth are dirty. Or dirty bathrooms is another weird one. Sometimes people who, for some reason or another, dream of dirty bathrooms. I don't know. But anyway, so maybe you dream about dirty bathrooms a lot. So what you do is every time you go into a bathroom, whether it's dirty or not, you try and ask yourself, oh, wait, could I be dreaming right now? And then you try and check. How do you check? Well, remember that when you're dreaming, your experience is being generated via internal information. Not from a stable external source of information like the external environment. So for this reason, dreams are a lot more unstable, and things don't work in dreams the way they do in waking life. In waking life, you know, I can check the time by looking at a digital clock, or I could try to read a piece of text, and I could look away and look back, and because I'm awake, it'll be the same, because the world hasn't changed. But in dreams, if you look away and look back, you'll find that the text will have changed. You might find that digital clocks are almost unreadable. And I'm not sure why this is beyond the lack of stable sensory input, but if you find a clock in a dream, look at it, you'll notice it'll be very difficult to read. You can do this with text. You can do this with light switches. Try turning on and off a light switch near you. If it doesn't work, chances are you're dreaming. You can also do really weird stuff like try and push your finger through your hand. Of course, in real life, you can't do that because fingers don't go through hands. But in your dream, well, there are no hands. It's all just a mental representation. So you can probably push your finger through your hand. You can also hold your nose like this and try and breathe. I can't do it now, but if I were asleep, I could pinch my nose and find that I could still breathe through it. Why? Because, well, in real life, my nose is not plugged. So there are all kinds of interesting ways you can try and check whether you're dreaming or not. And these are all called reality tests. So this is called reality testing. So you need to learn what's dreamlike about your dreams, and then when you notice something that reminds you of this dreamlike stuff in real life, you have to check whether you're dreaming or not, and you can do that with any number of different techniques. You should also try and attempt, having these dreams at optimal times. REM periods get longer the longer we sleep, so if you can sleep in, or if you can get up, stay awake for a few minutes, and then go back to sleep later, you'll have long REM periods. Afternoon naps are really good for this. So you can try doing this at the optimal time, right? And there are even specific techniques you can use when you do this, like mnemonic induction of lucid dreams or waking-induced lucid dreams. These name different techniques. Mnemonic induction of lucid dreaming is basically where you try and imagine yourself going through a dream that you've just had, except you imagine that you realize it's a dream, and you keep doing this as you're falling back asleep, and hopefully you'll find yourself replaying the dream and remembering, this was the dream I was having, I'm dreaming again, blah, blah. And then you can go and do your dream adventure stuff. Waking-induced lucid dreaming is when you try and enter a dream directly, and an interesting way to do this is actually to count yourself to sleep. So if you wake up in the middle of the night and you need to go back to sleep, you can simply count in your head, 1, I'm dreaming, 2, I'm dreaming, so on and so forth, like counting sheep. If this works, you'll find yourself in a dream, 51, I'm dreaming, 52, I'm dreaming. Hey, wait a minute, I really am dreaming, huzzah! And, off you go with your dream adventures again. Now, I did make an optional reading available for this class on out-of-body experiences. So I'll just say a little bit about that before we wrap it up for today. So what is an out-of-body experience? Well, lucid dreams, at least during the early part of the 20th century, were kind of associated with the paranormal, the parapsychological in some ways. In many ways they still are. The best place to find information about them, besides the internet, if you go into a bookstore, is often in like the New Age section, which has always been kind of a bummer to me because, this stuff is presented as very mystical when, I guess it can be, but it doesn't have to be. And if you're not inclined that way, you might think this is all just weird hippy-dippy stuff, but no, you should be able to read about lucid dreams in the psychology section too, I think. Anyway, one phenomenon that's probably more associated with the paranormal or the supernatural would be the out-of-body experience, which is an experience you have where it seems like your mind has left your physical body, right? Some people have these during sleep. Some people report them, during moments of peak performance as well. Like, for example, an athlete who's just, firing on all cylinders, doing everything right, playing the perfect game, making the perfect sports thing that they do. I don't know sports. Or like a musician who's so good that they can play the piece perfectly, almost automatically and unconsciously, and you kind of lose yourself. Your ego kind of drops away. And some people actually report having out-of-body experiences as if they're out of their body watching themselves perform or play the game or whatever they're doing. So very interesting experiences. Now, at least when it comes to the out-of-body experiences that happen when we're asleep or getting into bed or waking up, LeBerge and Lynn Levitin think that they are probably dreams. And they're probably related to what are called false awakenings. False awakenings are when you dream that you've woken up. You see this sometimes in movies and television, just like you see lucid dreams portrayed in movies and television sometimes, where a person has woken up and then they get up and they're going about their business, and then weird stuff starts to happen and they realize, oh no, I'm not really awake, and then they wake up all of a sudden for real, maybe in a panic or something. So those are false awakenings. A lot of out-of-body experiences can happen during false awakenings, which would suggest that those that do are really just dreams of leaving the body, right? They may also be a result of sleep paralysis. What is sleep paralysis? Well, remember that when you're in REM sleep, your body is mostly paralyzed, except for the eyes, the lungs, the heart, and of course the brain is very active as well. So when you're in REM sleep, you're more or less paralyzed, but sometimes it can happen where you kind of partially wake up, but your body and brain is still to some extent actually in REM sleep. So what these people will find is that they are awake, but they cannot move. And it can be very frightening if you don't know what's going on. But this is called sleep paralysis, and it's perfectly normal. So if it ever happens to you or has happened to you, don't worry. You know, you're not sick. There's no malevolent forces after you. It's just a matter of your brain partially waking up, but still kind of being in REM sleep, and your body still being paralyzed. And this is related to a lot of supernatural phenomena, not just the out-of-body experience. So if I wake up and I find that I'm paralyzed, I may sort of continue dreaming or fall back into a full-fledged dream where I can't move my body, but it seems like my mind leaves my body. That could explain that. Could be a case of sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis can also explain other old supernatural folkloristic kind of ideas, like the incubus and succubus. The incubus and the succubus were like sexual demons that were believed in Middle Age Europe and medieval Europe to visit people when they were sleeping. So the incubus was a male spirit that would attack women, and the succubus was a female spirit that was believed to attack men when they're sleeping. And a lot of these accounts are probably explainable as cases of sleep paralysis. Nowadays, a lot of stories of alien abductions occur, in circumstances or due to circumstances that we could very reasonably attribute to sleep paralysis. Many people, for example, who report having been abducted by aliens, report that the aliens have visited them at night, that they're unable to move, the aliens have paralyzed them somehow to take them onto their spaceship. This is explainable as either sleep paralysis or a full-blown dream. And dreams that sort of grow out of these cases of sleep paralysis can be particularly vivid and scary because we are a little bit more awake than we usually are when we dream, at least at the start of the experience. You can even try and induce one of these experiences using some of the techniques that you can read about online for having a lucid dream. So you could see for yourself, maybe induce some sleep paralysis and see if some aliens show up or something. I don't know, might be interesting. So that's it for today. Again, the message I kind of wanted to drive home today was that lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences were, and still are to some extent, but were associated with the paranormal, the supernatural, going all the way back to antiquity. But nowadays we can actually study these phenomena and explain them naturalistically. And the explanations are quite interesting, if you ask me. And it's interesting because, not just the explanations, but also because once we do explain something naturalistically, it kind of stops being spooky and paranormal. At least to those who, think naturalistically. Again, if you walk into the bookstore and go to the New Age section, you'll find books on lucid dreaming, along with books on astrology and psychics and all of that other stuff. But, at least in scientific circles, it is now acknowledged that lucid dreams are a real thing that happens. We can explain what's going on when we're having a lucid dream, and we can also explain other interesting phenomena like out-of-the-body experiences, visitations by the succubus, or alien abductions, just by appealing to what we've talked about today. Basically, the mind-body relation during sleep, and how dreams work, and how sleep works. So, very interesting stuff. That's why I wanted to talk about it today. So I guess the moral of the story is when parapsychology actually works, it stops being parapsychology and just becomes regular psychology. It's probably the reason why parapsychology has been on the decline since the 70s. But enough about parapsychology for today. What we're going to do next time is begin comparing and contrasting parapsychology with something called anomalistic psychology. As we'll see, where parapsychologists are interested in studying psi phenomena, ESP and PK, what anomalistic psychology instead tries to do is offer natural explanations for anomalous experiences. Like if somebody believes that they've had an out-of-body experience, or believes that someone has contacted them telepathically, or that they've had a precognitive dream. An anomalistic psychologist wants to explain what's going on there in terms of what we actually know about how nature works. So we'll be reading an interesting paper by Jones and Zusny, which is available on Brightspace. Go ahead and take a look at that. It is not a long paper, but they talk a little bit about why we should teach anomalistic psychology, and they also do an interesting study with their students on how the students' beliefs changed from the start to the end of the class. So we'll look at that, and we'll also talk a little bit more about the differences between parapsychology and anomalistic psychology, as well as why I think anomalistic psychology should supersede and replace parapsychology. So that's what we'll talk about next time. In the meantime, let me know if you have any questions. I hope you're all doing well and working hard on your critical responses, especially now that you have an extension. I hope you get those done, and I will do my best along with Carrie. We're both going to be working hard to get your feedback from response number 1 back to you within the next few days. Okay? So that is it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. Hit me up on Discord, or leave a message in the comments, or write me an email, and I will see you next time to talk about anomalistic psychology. Bye for now, everyone.